The winds of the frozen north still howl in these veins! Arise, servitor! Claim our beloved debt!
You all will regret trespassing in my realm!
Flee, cowards! In the end, everyone pays!
Time to die!
Hello, Asumi here, and this is my guide to the Maw of Souls dungeon on Mythic and Mythic Plus. I'll be discussing all of the mobs you'll encounter in detail, their abilities, how to pull them in access, and how to handle bosses alongside the random affixes you might get week to week. Let's start with the trash leading up to Ymmeron. First we have Seeker Slavers, who will always begin by summoning a maiden from a nearby cage. Tanks will have to face fractures away from the group, and this ability can be sidestepped by the tank as well. You can see it looks like this giant pile of dust heading down the road. Slavers will then attempt to harpoon a ranged player and anyone within 8 yards of that player, snaring them before attempting to use Barbed Spear. Barbed Spear is an ability with an 8-yard range around the slaver that leaves a nasty bleed on all targets it hits, and these will stack if you are hit by multiple slavers. It's got a giant red arcing animation to it, and yes, you can avoid it. Slavers will also cast Swirling Muck, a misty puddle that moves along ground, dealing damage to anyone in its path. So the mob that they summon, the Maiden, has 2 abilities, Breach Armor and Hue Soul. Breach Armor targets the tank and leaves a stacking reduced armor debuff, while Hue Soul leaves a healing absorb debuff on all targets in front of the Maiden when it's cast. Maidens and Slavers can be stunned, and both of their abilities can be outranged, but for the most part, just be sure to face these mobs away from allies. The bridge leading to Ymmeron's arena has a few Phallics waiting to jump down and apply diseases to the tank. These can be spell reflected if timed correctly. They'll accompany the Seeker's Soulkeeper. These mobs will use Defiant Strikes and Brackwater Blasts. A random player will get the blast debuff, causing them to explode for frost damage when it wears off. Keep spread 8 yards to avoid hitting friends. The Defiant Strike should be really obvious. If you aren't waiting for it, DBM should yell at you, and a quick look around will identify where the red swinging fool is coming from. After the bridge, on your left, there will be more of those slavers, the ones who did that AoE bleed, along with a Rune Carver. This guy mostly casts fireballs, but occasionally casts Flare, which just targets a spot on the ground to do an 8-yard fiery explosion. The last pack has a Shield Maiden, 2 Rune Carvers, a Soul Keeper, that's the guy who does the Defiant Strikes, and a Slaver, that guy who does the Barbed Spear AoE bleed thing. Pay attention to Defiant Strikes, move out for Barbed Spear if you can, tanks face everything away from the group, move out with the blast debuff, watch for fire under your feet, be careful about getting hooked in if you're ranged, and finish them off as quickly as you can. Now with the timer ticking away precious moments, you'll be wanting to pull as much as you can, as often as you can. Let's think about some affixes and how they'll change what you do. You should know how all the affixes work, so I'll just be covering when you need to pay particular attention to certain ones. If you happen to get bolstering, the Phallics are incredibly annoying due to their low health and the sheer number, making it possible to buff Soul Keepers to boss status. Spend some time dealing with the bridge on its own before pulling more. Necrotic also fits into this category because of the amount of mobs that are just wailing on you, stacking the debuff up and up and up. As they can be stunned, be sure to do so and start running away when they're close to death so you can spend more time dropping your debuff while DPS is still doing their thing, rather than after combat ends forcing you to stand still and waste time. Raging makes longer pulls much more dangerous if you can't execute well with your group comp, especially with Fortified on a +10, so for the last pack, don't be afraid to start kiting and picking off mobs one at a time. You can backtrack across the bridge if necessary, but remember to communicate where you'll be moving so your group can stay clear. The Soul Keeper is the only mob that can't be CC'd, so take him out if you really want to run safely. Now let's talk about Ymmeron. I like to tank him right about here. It trivializes his Frozen Winds ability. If you're a Prot Warrior, you can spell reflect his Dark Slash. Please do. It really hurts him. Do it every time you can after the first, since that'll line up with the Dark Slash he casts while raising undead. For other tanks, it's magic damage, and it really hurts, so use any mitigation that'll dampen shadow effects. Move out of his sphere preemptively if you don't have a run speed. Just watch timers for that and avoid running into Banes. Remind players to stack together when he raises skeletons, and be sure to finish them off quickly under a stun, or use strong CDs to survive the incoming damage. Using Lust on the Trash, Ymmeron, or if you're on a lower Mythic Plus and you care to drag it all up to Ymmeron for a massive AoE fest, all are fine ideas. You won't really need Lust for the boat's trash or Harborin, and you'll be using your next one on Helia's second phase anyway. Try to have a range to make their way up to the horn when Ymmeron is on his last legs to get everyone on the boat as soon as possible. The boat's trash starts you off with 2 waterlogged soul cards. They'll channel an ability called Soul Siphon. Please interrupt this, as there's nothing else you can interrupt here. It heals them and deals damage to a player over its duration. They'll also kick barrels at random players. Pay attention for this and sidestep it. It'll explode on contact with any players or walls and deals high damage in a 5-yard radius. These guys also curse players that reduce the damage they do based on missing health. If players aren't standing in anything or being drained, it's nothing to really worry about, but combined with other packs, you'll want to have it removed if someone who can is available. Immediately around the corner you'll find 2 Sea Curse Swift Blades. They'll sometimes deal extra tank damage with a very sinister strike, but more notably will tend to disappear and leave copies of themselves. Stay away or behind these copies to avoid taking damage, but be careful not to pull extra mobs. Now if you pull these 2 packs together, do note that the Swift Blades are immune while they're gone, and it'll be easy to get hit by barrels while trying to avoid copies and their strikes. Even more annoying can be the Sea Legs buff that they gain, giving them around a 50% chance to avoid attacks and deflect spells. It can be purged and stolen if you have that available too. Again, you want to be careful with bolstering and necrotic. There are dogs around the corner waiting to make your life living hell. With how small these hallways are, Volcanic will make awareness even more crucial, and Raging will more than likely result in almost full heals from the guards if they're allowed to channel alongside the one-shots from strikes. The Swift Blades and guards can't be stunned, so if you can't survive pulling them all at once, don't try to, since there isn't room to run away. Now while you're pulling the dogs, keep an eye out for the Mariner, who likes to wander around at about the same time you finish off the Swift Blades. If you can, stack together and spin the dogs down, and if you really can afford to, take the Mariner too. Use healing cooldowns and damage reduction to survive his Lantern of Darkness ability, and try to finish him off between casts, especially on Raging, as he can easily decimate groups with this buff if he gets it during a cast. Start checking to see which door is open, either the one behind the Grime Walker or the one behind the pack of enemies on the right. There's also a wandering dog pack around, and another Mariner on the other side of the ship making his rounds that you have to be aware of, so be ready to mark him if you ever just happen to see him walking around. To make mob count in a reasonable amount of time, I like to pull both packs regardless, starting off with the Grime Walker. He's not difficult, but he can chew away a lot of time because of his beefy ass health pool, so use it to recover from the Mariner. If you spent all your cooldowns there, let your healer start drinking before you pull him. Be sure to have the tank face the breath away from the group at all times. It does leave a disease if it hits you, but this is really easy to dodge, so please focus on avoiding it. Be sure to move him around between these breaths so the poisonous sludge doesn't stop melee from getting in and dealing damage. And the 3-pack of dogs might come around while dealing with this guy, so if you have bad affixes, again, like bolstering, be sure you don't pull the dogs with him or kill the dogs while he's alive. The pack on the other side of the ship has Swift Blades, Skeletal Warriors, and more importantly, Sea Curse Miss Maidens. The Warriors have relatively low HP, so be careful not to trigger bolstering with them, but otherwise they do traditional Mortal Strike and Hamstring. The real problem in this group is the Miss Maiden. She constantly casts Shroud Bolt, basically it's a chain lightning, so being spread 15 yards away will limit the amount of chaining it actually does. Sorry melee, you're probably all going to get hit by this if she doesn't get interrupted. This, however, isn't the reason why you need to be worried about her. She's going to be casting an ability called Torrent of Souls every now and then, which lets her fire out a ton of projectiles, and these things will randomly heal allies and deal damage to your group. It is just a really bad ability, so never let it happen if you can. When you pull this group, be sure to start moving them up the stairs so the Mariner doesn't accidentally pull with them, because it's almost a guaranteed wipe if you do. And once you get past these mobs, at the top of the stairs you'll have 2 Hellerjar champions. These guys do a ton of damage to the tanks and occasionally buff themselves with Ghostly Rage, which means they're going to start doing more damage to the tanks for 6 seconds. And then immediately after they stop wailing on your tank, they're going to start casting Bone-Chilling Scream, and it'll fear everyone within 12 yards of them. Since it can be outranged, don't be afraid if you have to run away. I like to mark them and assign interrupts, and in a pinch you can also have everyone else run the hell away. Try and drag these guys up the stairs to help save some time and get ready for the second boss. Harborin is relatively easy to deal with, especially if you have all the players in the group stacking up at all times. That's because the majority of his abilities will target ranged players. The first of which is Cosmic Scythe. Please step out of this. Just look up and you'll see where it's headed. He'll also summon a Shackled Servitor off a random player. The ad needs to be killed as soon as possible and interrupted to avoid a burst of AoE damage. He'll also spawn puddles of shit on the ground with Nether Rip. Do your best to stay out of these, but stay near them so you can keep all of them in one spot. Lastly, he'll keep using an ability called Fragment throughout the fight. This will stun a random player throughout its channel, and then cause a couple of ads to begin walking away from that player. While these ads are up, they'll deal increasing ticking damage to that player, so kill them off as quickly as you can. These things can be stunned and snared, and whenever I used a Shockwave on my Warrior, so long as I hit Harborin with it too, this spell was up every single time he cast the ability. As soon as you finish off Harborin, the last section of the dungeon is accessible. All of the remaining trash will start running towards your group. Just wait for them to separate into their smaller chunks before picking anything up. Again, trying to make mob count. Just stay on the left side. I like to pick up the 2 champions at the front though. Just take them by themselves, and you can assign interrupts. You'll deal with them just the way you did with the 2 champions that were right before Harborin. After the 2 champions, you'll encounter a group with a Swift Blade and 2 healing maidens. They function identically to the ones below the deck of the ship, so keep stuns and interrupts handy. The group afterwards is a maiden and a champion. I like to save my stun for the maiden so I can interrupt the fear from the champion in case something goes wrong on interrupts. And the last group will be a Swift Blade and a Soul Keeper, that Defiant Strike dude from the beginning of the dungeon. If you can, since there's nothing to interrupt off these 2, I'd recommend pulling them alongside the mini-boss at the helm of the ship. Skjal? Otherwise, just burn them down quickly and take him on by himself. For mob count, Skjal is 8% by himself, so if you need more than that for any reason, pull along the other side of the ship, but so long as you follow the same mobs that I have in this guide, it shouldn't be necessary. You should be at 92. Skjal deals moderately heavy tank damage, mostly due to his 2 melee abilities, Bind and Double. They're fairly easy to miss on lower difficulties, but once you get to higher mythics, you'll notice the bleeding your tank will be doing. Bind comes in every time he hits full energy, and Double is a cone AoE in front of him, so keep it faced away. His more annoying and noticeable abilities are Give No Quarter, where he'll teleport to a random player and deal damage in an 8-yard circle around him. He'll almost immediately begin casting Debilitating Shout afterwards. This deals damage and causes the party to take increased damage, so please have multiple interrupts ready for it. Skjal will also constantly be summoning in skeletal adds, so misdirect them if you can and have the tank ready to pick them up. The warriors, again, don't do much more than melee, but the sorcerers keep casting Necrotic Bolt. This gives them a stacking buff that increases their damage, but it will also detonate if it reaches 3, and this causes a barrage to all players within 30 yards. This effect can be purged and even spell sealed if you have a mage that wants to spend a couple extra globals, but otherwise these mobs can all be stunned, silenced, and interrupted. After Skjal dies, if you have mob count, don't even bother killing the rest of the skeletons. They'll never follow you to Helya, so just dump down. Helya has 2 phases. The first will last between 180%. Every time you kill a tentacle, she'll lose 3.3% of her max health, so killing 6 tentacles will end this phase. She starts the encounter with 3 tentacles, the Destructor and 2 Grasping. Destructor tentacles need to be tanked, while the other 2 can freely be cleaved down after the former is destroyed. Destructor tentacles will start smashing the boat if there's nobody in melee range, so they can't just be ignored. And they hit pretty freaking hard, so melee, make sure a tank is the closest around before you start to wail on it, even if you misdirect the tank. As soon as anything is close to it, they're going to start beating on them, even if the tank isn't the primary threat. Destructor tentacles will also use Rapid Rupture, and this is a stacking bleed effect. It usually falls off before it can be a problem, but it's just another reason to prioritize these tentacles when they spawn. Now Helya will sometimes debuff players with Taint of the Sea, which is dispellable, but every time it's removed or whenever it expires, it deals damage to the whole group. Otherwise, it does ticking damage to that player, so if the group can survive the AoE from dispelling it, try to have your healer remove it as soon as possible. On Mythic and up, when it's dispelled, it'll cause a swirling circle to appear on the ground, and that'll also deal damage to anyone stood in it. Now, the most deadly part about Phase 1 is the other Mythic addition, Brackwater Blast, and this can be extremely easy to miss until it wipes the group. Helya will raise her arm up and start casting, almost without warning, and after 10 seconds, she will spray about half the boat in water, dealing damage that's pretty much always fatal. Now, the hand she is charging with is on the same side of the boat she is about to spray. Just make sure you have at least one player keeping an eye out for it and calling it out. When Phase 2 starts, you'll get a small intermission where you have to dodge a bunch of shit, so just do that. Piercing Tentacles will do a knockback and deal damage, while Turbulent Waters will sometimes bombard the ship. When Helya comes back up, just less than burn her down. She'll cast Torrent, which needs to be interrupted, and there does need to be at least 2 interrupts for this. The only other thing to note is that she'll occasionally come in close and start casting Corrupted Bellow. Dodge it quickly and keep attacking her. All of her other abilities are still in play, and if you can't take away this last 10% in a minute and a half, she'll submerge again. Oh, thank God Blizzard finally put in a teleport to get out of here. Now we can take our loot and go home. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this guide helped out. If you have any questions, please leave them below in the comment section. Don't forget to leave a like, and I'll see y'all next time with more dungeon guides. Take it easy.